Alexander came to the bus stop. He took some change out of his pocket and counted it, then grinned. So if I take the shuttle bus now, I won't have enough for bread and won't have dinner. And if I get to the college on my own, I won't go to sleep at home. I have 2 packs of instant noodles on the way home. I'll buy bread and mayonnaise and have a real feast. Joe looked at his watch and returned to the sidewalk and hurried towards the medical college, where he had been studying to become a paramedic for almost 2 years. Rushed to her aid, he did it in time because the old woman had already started to fall. Alexander picked her up in his arms and sat her down on the nearest bench. Now, patience, he said, I'll call an ambulance. The name of the medicine, he realized that everything is not so good with Grandma's health. Well, you said. He continued to hold her and let her calm down. After taking the drops, you should never take such a risk and walk on the street alone. You have attacks regularly. She nodded her gray head and said in a weak voice, yes, grandson, but it's nothing. I've gotten used to it, and I don't have an assistant. I live alone, and this morning I went to buy some milk, but you see, I didn't even make it to the store. Joe asked me what your name is. Oh, what a beautiful name you have. My late husband was also named Joe, although I used to call him Shura. He liked it better that way. The old lady fell silent for a moment, then said, but I'm feeling better now, and I just wanted to ask you, Joe, to take me home. I live over there in that building on the 4th floor. I used to like it when I was younger, didn't notice the height, but the older I get, the harder it is to go up and down. Thankfully, the elevator almost always works, but sometimes it breaks, and then it takes weeks to repair. Listening to his new acquaintance, Joe helped her reach the entrance and then up to her apartment. To his surprise, Vera lived in rather decent conditions, although her 3-room apartment resembled more of a museum. Don't be surprised, young man, she noticed his bewilderment. This apartment belonged to my son, who worked at a secret research institute, and it was passed down to him. He also worked there and earned his doctorate. It's been so long, and it's been 12 years since he left this world, and here I am, living out my lifetime alone. Do you have any children? Joe by now answered, no, I no longer have children. Only son, Sergei, was our beloved one, and besides, he was a late child. Unfortunately, he had very little of his life left. He grew up and fell in love, but the girl he ended up with was not good for him, despite her beauty. He didn't really love Angelina. She was quite young at the time, barely 18, and we didn't really like her from the start. I can't even say why, but we were against their marriage. It even led to a big argument between us and Sergei. We did eventually make up, of course, but it was too late. He returned to the city where she was born with Nastya. But it didn't turn out well there. Sergei was studying and working here, and he started drinking there, but we didn't know everything was going downhill. He had issues in his married life, but he was too proud to admit it. Sometimes he would call us, but he always said everything was fine with them. Then one day, a stranger's voice on the phone introduced himself as a police major and told us that our Michael had died in a fight. Later at the trial, we found out he got into a fight because he was jealous of Nastya being with someone else. The incident ended with a trial. Alexander asked with sympathy, and the old lady sighed. They gave the young man a very short sentence. They decided it was an accidental push from Michael, and that was it. As for Angelina, I don't know. We haven't seen her once, and she didn't even come to the funeral. Joe looked at the old lady, realizing she was deeply moved by her story, and gently stroked her wrinkled hands. Don't worry too much, Vera. You need to take care of your health. It's important. There's no joking around with it. This is me, speaking to you as a future doctor. The elderly woman perked up. So, you're studying medicine, right? Are you almost done with college? Well done. Vera noticed Joe sneak a glance at his watch and gasped. Why am I keeping you here? You're late for your class. Thank you, dear, for everything. The most important thing is that you're feeling better. She tried to get up to see him to the door, but Joe held her back. No, I'll see myself out. You just relax. After my classes, I'll stop by to check on you if it's all right, of course. The old lady welcomed the idea. I'll be waiting for you, Joe. Joe ended up running late for his college class. On his way back, he stopped by a store and, with his last bit of money, bought some milk for his new acquaintance. When the old lady saw the package in his hands, she clapped her hands and smiled. You're such a caring and thoughtful young man. Please come in and let me make you some tea with pastries. You can tell me more about yourself. And Joe proceeded to tell her about his life, how he used to live with his parents in a remote Siberian village, and had once thought he'd spend his entire life there. He talked about his always cheerful and lively demeanor. But then he mentioned a sudden and ruthless incident when he clapped his hands and slumped to the floor without even screaming, a seizure that had taken him by surprise. The doctors arrived much too late. The ambulance couldn't reach their village due to the muddy, impassable roads. Joe described how his father cried out in terror, unable to cope with the tragedy that had befallen him. After the funeral, he descended into a long and heavy bout of drinking, completely forgetting that he had a son. For a while, I lived in my Aunt Linda's house, Joe concluded. Aunt Linda is kind, but she has a small house. In our region, they say you can't stir the spoon without upsetting the family balance, her husband, her parents-in-law, her brother, and 4 children. To avoid inconveniencing everyone, I set up a space for myself in the attic. In essence, I lived there until I moved to the city. I only came down in the fall to sleep on a mattress on the floor in the room with my 3 younger cousins. Poor boy, Vera shook her head. But please tell me what happened to your father. He drank heavily for about a year and a half, taking everything valuable out of the house and not wanting to see or speak to anyone. When my Aunt Nadia and I tried to talk some sense into him, he would shout and chase us away. Sometimes it felt like he had lost his mind. One day, his heart gave out. We went to visit him, bringing hot pies, but it was too late. Oh, our sins, our heavy burdens, Vera sighed, pouring more tea for Sasha. Joe shrugged when asked about how he ended up in their city. Our house was spacious, and Aunt Linda asked if I could allow them to move into my house. Of course, I agreed. After my father's funeral, they moved in almost immediately. My in-laws and Aunt Nadia stayed in the old house, while she and Uncle Ethan and the kids moved. By that time, I was finishing school and preparing to apply to medical college. Everyone knew I was going to leave, and one evening, Aunt Linda initiated a conversation. She mentioned that it might be a good idea if I were to give her the house. After all, she sheltered me when I was in need, fed me, took care of me, and never mistreated me. Now that I had grown up and become an independent person, she felt that I could venture to the city, get an education, establish a home, and perhaps even marry. Meanwhile, they would stay in the village, if I didn't mind, of course. Vera looked at him and asked, "What did you say?" I agreed, and when I turned 18, I signed everything over. Well, she was right. I was on my own and wouldn't go to waste. Besides, she had a large family to feed and her house is in a good location. There's a store nearby and a school. You're a kind soul, Joe, and you've helped your own family. Where are you living now? I rent a single room in the barracks on Soviet Street. You know, it's nothing fancy, Joe replied, chuckling. Vera nodded, acknowledging the simplicity of his living situation. Well, it's affordable, I suppose. Joe looked at the old woman and laughed. Hey, how about moving in with me? There's plenty of space, and it's close to your college. But why are you alone? Besides, I could use someone to help look after me, go shopping, buy medication, and even give me injections, considering you're almost a doctor. You don't have to worry about rent or food. You know what, Joe? I think that's a brilliant idea, Vera said thoughtfully. I'm alone as well, and I could use some company. Besides, I might need someone to look out for me, run errands, and help with medical needs. It's not like I need to pay rent or buy my own food. I'll take care of you myself. Look at how skinny you are. I have a good pension, more than enough for food and medicine, Vera said with determination. Joe paused for a moment and then replied, all right, but I'll also be responsible for buying groceries. My scholarship is quite modest, and I occasionally do some night shifts unloading cargo to make ends meet. However, I'll stop that now. Vera smiled and said, let's make it clear from the start. Your education and our well-being come first, so no more odd jobs. I'll rely on you to look after me. I'm not a charity case. So we'll strike a deal, my house and food in exchange for your help and care. Deal, Joe laughed. A couple of hours later, he retrieved his belongings from the barracks and returned to Vera Vasilievna's place. They both felt that fate had brought them together. The bright, clean, and spacious room Vera had allocated to Joe filled him with delight. As he drifted off to sleep, he once again thanked the heavens for this unexpected happiness. Vera, too, was content. She had grown to love Alexander, as she affectionately called him, treating him like a grandson. She was genuinely pleased with his assistance and the fact that he had relieved her of her loneliness. Joe had indeed filled her days with warmth. Moreover, he was quite skilled and managed to do it all. He cooked lunches and dinners, maintained order in the apartment, handled the iron efficiently, and easily fixed anything that needed repair. He took care of the old lady's health, a task not undertaken by all relatives. Neighbors watched with interest as he accompanied her on walks in the park and thoughtfully covered her with a warm blanket when Vera sat on a bench to catch some fresh air. Then came a chilly December evening when Joe returned home and was surprised to find that Vera wasn't alone. Sitting in the kitchen was a beautiful dark-haired woman, and a young man about Sasha's age. They both turned to look at him. Vera wiped away a tear from her wrinkled cheek and said, "Joe, let me introduce you. This is Angelina. I told you about her, remember? She's my late Sergei's wife, and this is his son, Adam. Can you believe I never knew I had a real grandson?" Angelina was mad at me for a long time, but now she's decided to make amends. "Oh, what a blessing, Joe. Why are you just standing there? Sit down quickly. We're about to have dinner for the first time in a long while." Alexander felt a bit out of place. Angelina and Adam were clearly uncomfortable with his presence. After hastily sipping a cup of hot tea, he apologized and explained that he had exams to study for. He'd excused himself and headed to his room. Half an hour later, Vera knocked on Joe's door. "I suggested that our guests stay with us. You won't mind, will you?" Vera said, looking at Joe with a smile. Joe returned the smile and replied, "Of course not, Vera. How could I? This is wonderful. Instead of having one grandson, I'll now have two. I can set up a place for him in my room. There are two sofas here after all." "You're a very kind young man. I'm sure you two will become friends," Vera said with assurance. However, Sasha and Adam's friendship didn't quite blossom. Adam was brazen and arrogant, immediately acting as if he were the master of the house. He hadn't studied or worked anywhere, preferring to spend entire days glued to his phone. Sasha was irritated by his habits of scattering things around and making a mess everywhere. He tried talking to Adam about it a couple of times, but he was met with indifference and contempt. When Angelina asked about Sasha, she just shrugged her shoulders and told him that Adam was at home now. Sasha had even found himself going to bed hungry on some nights, but he didn't want to complain to Vera Vasilievna. He could see that she was incredibly happy, and he didn't want to ruin her joy. However, in early February, something irreversible happened. Joe was at college when he was called to the director's office. He was quite surprised because he didn't think that Pavel Valentinovich even knew of his existence. His astonishment deepened when he realized that two police officers were waiting for him. They introduced themselves as Alexander, a fellow villager known to Vera. "Oh, that's my landlady. I rent a room from her and take care of her," Joe explained. The police officers smirked and said, "Well, you've taken care of her quite well, young man. We received a report that you intended to poison the elderly lady." "In what sense?" Alexander stammered, losing his ability to speak coherently. The police officer continued, "What I mean is that Vera Vasilievna suffered a severe poisoning, and she's in the ICU. Who's giving her medication?" Joe whispered, his strength failing him as he slumped onto a table that was against the wall. "I am a medic, which means I handle medications. I managed to get her to put the apartment in my name, but I didn't want to wait for her natural death." The police officer gloated, "So you decided to expedite things. Well, now you'll receive a nice long sentence for it." Joe retorted, "Don't call her grandma, and how dare you say that?" Until he grasped the meaning of the officer's other words, Joe had paled. When he understood what the officer was talking about, he said, "Wait, who made Vera Vasilievna transfer the apartment to me? I never forced her to do that, and I never manipulated her trust. We just lived together, that's all." His voice strangely cracked, and Joe added with pale lips, "And I didn't poison anyone. That's a lie." The police officer frowned and said, "Your Vera should thank her relatives if she makes it. Doctors give no guarantees, and if she dies, you're in for some serious trouble, my boy." Alexander was taken to the police station, where he was questioned at length, and then sent to the detention center. Sasha's head throbbed with unbearable pain, and the tiny bedbugs infesting the prison cell provided no respite. His only relief came from walking in circles in a corner. For nearly 2 days, Alexander paced his cell slowly, measuring the passing time. He was alone in his cell, and then they placed some skinny old man in it, with faded green tattoos on his weathered skin. The old-timer asked Sasha with sharp gray eyes, "Newbie, got any aerials?" Joe nodded silently and replied, "You'll get used to it. The first time is scary, but it gets smoother. Oh, how I wish for a cup of mint tea." They didn't talk much after that. But at night, Joe, sitting on the floor and frequently drifting into a heavy half-sleep, jolted awake when he heard his cellmate's heavy groans. He approached the old man and leaned over him, asking, "What's wrong? Are you feeling unwell? Is it another seizure?" Joe listened to the old man's complaints and demanded that he lie on his back. He assured him, "You'll feel better in a moment." Joe began to rub his hands together to warm them up. At first, Sasha's patient cried out in pain, but then he started to quiet down. When Joe wiped the sweat from the man's forehead and stepped aside, he had visibly improved. "Are you a doctor?" The old man asked. I'm a trainee medical assistant, almost done with my studies. Just a bit more to get my diploma. But here, all this. Joe gestured around them, and what you did for me just now, it's therapeutic massage. I've always been interested in this topic, acupuncture points, and all that. Given your circulatory issues, it's crucial to have a massage, and lymphatic drainage is necessary. From everything you told me, the one thing that stuck with me is that you need a massage. All right, we'll figure something out. What's your name? I'm Joe. I'm Arkady, but you can call me Zoto. Joe, you'll make a great doctor one day. Well, not quite a doctor yet. Alexander gestured towards the hospital. But let's say it's not too likely. So tell me everything. Maybe I can help with something. They'll probably release me from here in the morning. I think my lawyer is already working on it. So you've done me a favor, and I may still be of use to you. Arkady smirked. It turned out he was right. In the morning, they came for him, and he winked at Sasha. Don't drift away, Doc. We'll win. 2 days later, Sasha was called in by the investigator again. The investigator announced that Joe was free. In terms of Vera Vasilievna, she has been transferred to a good clinic, apparently thanks to some acquaintance Arkady pulled strings. I talked to her, and she genuinely doesn't remember any Arkady. Instead, she revealed that you are innocent. Her ex-fiancée, Angelina, found her will and decided to put her in her grave along with getting rid of you. They're both giving statements now, accusing each other of the scandal they had that evening when they found the will. Things didn't go well at all for Vera after she took too much of her medication that day. That's why everything turned out this way. Are you free to go back to college now? I've already called and explained everything, so they won't hassle you there. Can I leave then? Alexander asked. Well, if you don't want to stick around, go ahead, the investigator joked. Thanks for the hospitality, Joe chuckled, but I better get going. He returned home and stood under the shower for a long time, washing away the troubles of the past few days. Then he changed clothes and hurried to the clinic where Vera was. Joe and grandson, Vera exclaimed. I nearly lost my mind when I found out everything. Please forgive me, it's all my fault. I acted alone, and I'm to blame for everything. But I wanted to do what was best for you. You didn't have to put me in your will. You have a real grandchild, don't you? Joe isn't my grandson. I made sure of that because I was still uncertain in my mind. I took the necessary DNA tests. When Angelina was rummaging through my things and found my will, I showed her the test results. But what happened next? You know the rest, Vera explained. Vera, don't worry about it. The investigator promised they would get a suspended sentence. I even asked him for that. However, I have a question for you, the doctors told me. Why did you ask someone named Arkady to help me? Who is he? I don't know him, Joe said, smiling as he remembered his peculiar companion in adversity. Suddenly, the door to the ward opened, and the head doctor of the clinic walked in. So, how is our esteemed patient today? He inquired with a smile. After hearing the old lady's gratitude, he turned to Sasha. And is this the excellent future doctor I've been recommended to by a certain esteemed individual in certain circles? Come with me to my office, let's have a talk. Yes, I want you to work with me once you finish your studies, which won't be long. That's wonderful, the head doctor said. Several years passed, and Joe worked at the city's best clinic. He continued to live with his grandmother, who had become a cherished family member. He was quite content. When Nurse Alina whispered mysteriously that Arkady had come for a massage, Joe just smiled and nodded, saying, sure, and please make some mint tea. Well, you know everything already.